In the bustling heart of a nameless city, a nondescript office worker went about his mundane routine. His cubicle was a sea of beige, a monotony occasionally broken by the flickering of a computer screen. One day, during lunch, he noticed something peculiar. A single, pristine white napkin lying on his desk. Puzzled, he picked it up, examining it for any sign of who might have left it there. Finding nothing unusual, he used it to wipe a small coffee spill on his desk and threw it away. Later that afternoon, he returned from a meeting to find another napkin, identical to the first, lying in the same spot. This time, it was slightly crumpled and had a small, barely noticeable stain. As he held it, an odd sensation washed over him. A fleeting sense of unease that he couldn't quite place. Shrugging it off, he disposed of the napkin and continued with his day. Over the next week, the napkins kept appearing, always in the same spot, each time a little more soiled, a little more unsettling. He began to feel a growing dread, a sense that he was being watched. He installed a small hidden camera to catch the prankster, but the footage revealed nothing. The napkins appeared out of thin air. His sleep became restless, filled with nightmares of suffocating under a mountain of dirty napkins. His work performance suffered, and his colleagues noticed his increasingly haggard appearance. One night, after another sleepless bout, he woke to find his apartment filled with napkins, each one bearing a different stain, each one whispering incoherent horrors. Panicked, he fled to a hotel, but the napkins followed. In a fit of desperation, he sought the help of a psychiatrist, who dismissed his claims as stress-induced hallucinations. The napkins, however, grew bolder. They appeared in his car, in his briefcase, even in his clothes. Each new napkin carried a different, more disturbing stain. Blood, bile, things he couldn't identify. As he spiraled further into madness, he realized the stains told a story. His story. Every shame, every secret, every sin he'd ever committed was etched in those fibers. One fateful night, surrounded by the filthy reminders of his past, he snapped. The next morning, the police found his body in his apartment, suffocated under a mound of soiled napkins. In the aftermath of his death, his colleagues spoke in hushed tones, trying to make sense of the inexplicable events. The office, once a place of mundane routine, was now shrouded in an eerie silence. The cleaning staff found themselves dealing with the occasional inexplicable appearance of napkins, each one bearing a different story, a different horror. The legend of the cursed napkins grew, and soon, no one wanted to work in that cubicle. New employees, unaware of the grim history, often found themselves plagued by the same inexplicable occurrences. The napkins seemed to choose their victims, always targeting those with hidden secrets or past regrets. The cycle of madness continued, each new victim adding another layer to the growing legend. The once nondescript office became infamous, a place of whispered horrors and unseen stains. A small, cozy restaurant on the outskirts of town had earned a reputation for its impeccable service and spotless cleanliness. The owner, a meticulous man with a passion for perfection, prided himself on maintaining the highest standards. Every evening, as the last patrons left, he would conduct a thorough inspection, ensuring that every surface gleamed and every utensil was in its place. One night, as he was finishing his rounds, he noticed a single-used napkin on one of the tables. Irritated, he picked it up and threw it away, making a mental note to speak with his staff. The next night, the same thing happened. A single-used napkin, this time on a different table. Over the following week, the pattern continued. The napkins seemed to move of their own accord, appearing on different tables, always used, always dirty. Determined to catch the culprit, he installed security cameras throughout the dining area. Reviewing the footage, he saw something impossible. The napkins appeared out of nowhere. There were no customers, no staff members in sight, just the napkins, materializing from thin air. His nights became consumed with trying to understand the phenomenon. He stopped sleeping, obsessively watching the footage, trying to catch the napkins in the act. His obsession began to affect the restaurant. Customers noticed his gaunt appearance and erratic behavior. business started to decline. One night, he stayed in the restaurant, determined to confront whatever was haunting him. As midnight approached, he heard a rustling sound. Following the noise, he found himself in the kitchen. There, he saw it. A napkin, slowly unrolling itself, revealing a message written in blood. "We see you," it read. Terrified, he fled the restaurant, never to return. The next day, the staff found the restaurant in disarray, with napkins strewn everywhere. The new owner, dismissing the story as a local legend, reopened the restaurant. But the napkins never stopped. Patrons would find used napkins on their tables, sometimes with unsettling messages. The restaurant, once a beacon of cleanliness, became infamous for its haunted napkins. As time passed, the stories about the restaurant grew more bizarre. Some claimed that the napkins were cursed, tied to a tragic event that had taken place many years ago. Others believed that the napkins were the work of a vengeful spirit, seeking retribution for a grave injustice. Despite the new owner's best efforts, the restaurant's reputation was tarnished. One particularly stormy night, the new owner decided to confront the phenomenon head-on. Armed with determination and a sense of skepticism, he stayed in the restaurant alone. As the wind howled outside, he felt a chill run down his spine. The familiar rustling sound echoed through the empty dining area. He followed the noise to the kitchen, where he found a napkin slowly unfolding. This time, the message was different. "Help us," it read, in trembling letters. Intrigued and terrified, he delved into the history of the restaurant, uncovering a dark secret. Decades ago, the building had been the site of a tragic fire that claimed the lives of several people. The spirits of the victims, unable to find peace, had been trying to communicate through the napkins. Moved by their plight, the new owner held a ceremony to honor the victims and offer them peace. He invited the community to join in, and together, they remembered the lives lost in the tragic fire. That night, for the first time in years, the restaurant was quiet. The napkins stopped appearing, and the sense of unease lifted. The restaurant's reputation slowly recovered, and it once again became a beloved local establishment. The new owner, having faced the ghosts of the past, felt a sense of peace and closure. The legend of the haunted napkins faded into memory, a reminder of the importance of honoring the past and finding closure. It started on an ordinary Wednesday. The workday had dragged on endlessly, and the thought of a peaceful evening at home had been my only solace. I arrived home, tossing my keys on the kitchen counter, and plopped down on the couch. Little did I know, this would be the last moment of normalcy I would experience for a long while. I had bought a pack of fancy napkins the previous weekend, deciding that it was time to add a touch of elegance to my otherwise mundane apartment. They were white with delicate lace patterns, an extravagant purchase, but they made me feel somewhat refined. I had used one of them for dinner that night and left it on the coffee table. I stared at the napkin absent-mindedly, my mind wandering. Something about it seemed off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Dismissing it as fatigue, I turned on the TV and immersed myself in a crime drama. Hours flew by, and I decided to call it a night. Just as I was about to head to bed, I heard a soft rustling sound. My eyes darted to the napkin. It was moving. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The napkin was perfectly still. "I'm losing my mind," I muttered to myself, turning off the TV and heading to my bedroom. That night, I had strange dreams. Images of the napkin creeping across the floor, wrapping itself around my face and suffocating me. I woke up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, but the apartment was quiet. I laughed at my own paranoia, but a lingering sense of unease stayed with me. The next day at work was uneventful. By the time I got home, the memory of the moving napkin seemed almost silly. I walked into the living room and froze. The napkin was not where I had left it. It was on the floor, a few feet away from the coffee table. My pulse quickened. "There's no way," I whispered, picking it up and inspecting it. It was just a napkin, a simple piece of cloth. Shaking my head, I placed it back on the table and went about my evening routine. As I prepared dinner, I kept glancing at the napkin, half expecting it to move again. It didn't. That night, I made sure to put the napkin in the trash. End of story, I thought. But the story was far from over. Around midnight, I heard the rustling again. This time it was louder, more persistent. I got up, heart hammering, and turned on the lights. The napkin was on the kitchen counter. I could feel the blood drain from my face. "This can't be real," I whispered. I approached it cautiously, and as I reached out to grab it, the napkin twitched and then shot across the counter, falling to the floor. I screamed, stumbling backward. The napkin lay still again, but I was no longer fooled. I grabbed a broom, using the handle to poke it. No response. I swept it into the dustpan and threw it out the window. Satisfied that I had finally rid myself of it, I went back to bed. The next morning, I found it in my bathroom. This time, it was wet, as if it had been soaked in water. I didn't touch it. Instead, I locked the bathroom door and called a friend. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't going insane. They arrived within an hour, and I recounted the bizarre events. My friend, skeptical but curious, agreed to help me investigate. We opened the bathroom door together. The napkin was gone. "See? It's just your imagination," they said, patting my shoulder. Relieved but still cautious, I thanked them and tried to go about my day. But the napkin wasn't done with me. Over the next few days, it appeared in the strangest places, inside my shoes, under my pillow, even in the fridge. Each time it seemed to be slightly different, wetter, dirtier, more tattered. One evening, exhausted and terrified, I decided to burn it. I grabbed the napkin, took it to the kitchen sink, and set it on fire. The flames quickly consumed it, leaving only ashes. "It's over," I sighed, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard the rustling again. This time, it was right beside me. I turned on the lamp, and there it was, whole and pristine, sitting on my nightstand. I screamed, jumping out of bed. The napkin followed, sliding across the nightstand and falling to the floor. I ran to the living room, heart pounding, and locked myself in. The napkin didn't follow. I stayed awake all night, waiting for it to make its move, but nothing happened. The next day I called a psychic. Desperation had driven me to seek answers from the unlikeliest sources. The psychic arrived, a serene expression on their face. They examined the napkin, now lying innocently on the living room floor. After a long silence, they looked at me with grave eyes. "This is no ordinary napkin," they said. "It harbors a restless spirit." I laughed, a hollow, desperate sound. "A spirit? In a napkin?" The psychic nodded. "Somehow this spirit has attached itself to this napkin. You must find out what it wants, or it will never leave you." "What does it want?" I asked, voice trembling. The psychic closed their eyes, murmuring under their breath. After a few minutes, they opened their eyes. "It wants peace. Seeks closure." "How do I give it closure?" I asked. But the psychic just shook their head. "That I cannot tell you. It is up to you to discover." Days turned into weeks, and the napkin continued to haunt me. It never harmed me physically. The psychological torment was unbearable. I tried talking to it, pleading, demanding, but it remained silent. The rustling at night became a constant reminder of my helplessness. One night, in a fit of rage, I grabbed the napkin and screamed at it. "What do you want from me?" To my shock, the napkin twitched in my hand. It began to unfold itself, slowly and deliberately. Inside, written in what looked like blood, was a single word: remember. "Remember what?" I cried, but the napkin fell limp again, offering no further clues. I racked my brain, trying to think of any event, any memory that could be linked to this haunting. And then it hit me. Years ago, I had been involved in an accident. I had hit something, but when I got out to check, there was nothing there. I had driven away, shaken, but relieved. Could it be that I had hit someone? Had their spirit attached itself to this napkin? Determined to find out, I did some research. I discovered that there had been a hit-and-run accident near the location I remembered. The victim had died, and the case had remained unsolved. I visited the site, bringing the napkin with me. I stood there, feeling the weight of guilt and fear. "I'm sorry," I whispered, placing the napkin on the ground. "I'm so sorry." The napkin rustled, and for a moment, it seemed to glow. Then it disintegrated into a fine dust, carried away by the wind. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, feeling a strange sense of relief. I returned home, half expecting the napkin to reappear, but it never did. The rustling at night ceased, and the eerie presence lifted. Life slowly returned to normal, but I was forever changed. I couldn't forget what had happened, and I couldn't shake the feeling that some part of that spirit still lingered, watching over me. The living napkin had been a strange and terrifying experience, but it had also taught me a valuable lesson about guilt, responsibility, and the unseen connections that bind us all.